Order, order. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Daniel Kawczynski to move the motion.
I'm very grateful, Sir Roger, for being able to highlight my debate on LGBT tolerance and education and acceptance in schools, and it's a great pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, Sir Roger. I wanted to call the debate for two main reasons. Firstly, because of the protests that I've seen on television recently at schools in Birmingham. My constituency is in that region, and we have seen over the last few months increasing number of protests outside some of these Birmingham schools, with parents protesting very vociferously against any form of LGBT teaching in those schools. And secondly, Sir Roger, because my researcher in the House of Commons came to see me the other day to highlight a situation where a friend of his had come out to him, crying, very upset, very vulnerable, didn't know how he was going to broach the subject with his family. And for me to see that even today, in 2019, there are young people who are still fearful of broaching their sexuality and who they are falling in love with their most intimate and closest friends and family members, is something that is clearly very worrying. I was born, Sir Roger, in communist Poland, the only Conservative member of Parliament to have been born in a communist country, I believe, and that was... no, I am, I can assure you. I've checked it out already. And communist Poland, I can assure you, Sir Roger, was, in my view, a highly intolerant society towards LGBT people. The Catholic Church in Poland, and I speak as a Roman Catholic, but the Catholic Church in Poland also was at the forefront of teaching young people and society at large that being gay was a sin. It was a sin, but it also should be punished. And that people who had the temerity to fall in love with a same-sex partner will ultimately go to hell. They will be condemned to purgatory and hell because they happen to be gay. And I think that this had a huge impact on a generation of children in communist Poland when it came to evaluating their own self-worth and what they felt of themselves when the church and the state were so homophobic towards this issue. The irony, and I speak again as a Roman Catholic, but the irony of this is that subsequently we have come across so many cases and so many prosecutions of Catholic priests, whether it's in Ireland, whether it's in America, or many other countries around the world, where Catholic priests from the pulpit, Sir Roger, have been informing us what a sin homosexuality is, but in their spare time, when Mass is over, going out and sexually abusing young boys on an industrial scale. I don't believe that the Roman Catholic Church has apologized enough, neither in this country or around the world, for the appalling abuses that Roman Catholic priests have carried out over decades against these young, vulnerable and innocent boys, many of whom will inevitably suffer the mental angst and torture as a consequence of those vile acts of abuse against young children. And of course, we have different situations that we face ourselves. I think because I was brought up in such a homophobic society, inevitably, I was conditioned, and I've used that word on the Radio Shropshire today when I was interviewed on this issue. I was conditioned as a young person that homosexuality was bad and it was a sin, and that you should feel ashamed of being gay, And so, of course, what do? Some young people have the confidence and the conviction in themselves that they will set that aside. And they will say, no, I'm gay and I'm proud, from a very young age. Other people, Sir Roger, don't have that confidence within them. So they hide what they are and who they are. They will hide under rocks or under stones and not peek out because they are fearful of the consequences for them and their families of showing that they are proud in being gay. And as a young person, I have to say to you, Sir Roger, I actually went as far as to trying to trick my own brain into thinking I was straight. And you do it over and over again. You pray to God that he hopes that he will change you somehow, that you won't have these strange feelings. Could you please be heterosexual? Could you please only be interested in women? And you try to trick the brain. And one thing I have learned in my 47 years, the most important thing I have learned in my 47 years, Sir Roger, is that you can't trick the brain. You can do almost anything, but you can't reprogram your mind. You can't reprogram your brain to be something sexually which you are not. So fearful was I that when it came to the time to come out, Sir Roger, I had to go back to Shrewsbury to inform the Shrewsbury Conservative Association that having been married to a lady for 10 years, I was now in a same-sex relationship. And I was so fearful, given the conditioning that I went through as a child, that I had to go to the House of Commons Health and Wellbeing team. And as you know, Sir Roger, these are great people who work here in the House of Commons who help members of Parliament through periods of stress, but also strain and mental problems. And I had to go and see them and talk to them. And it was only them, Sir Roger, and I want to pay tribute to the staff here at the House of Commons who work in the Health and Wellbeing section. It was those wonderful men and women who work in the Health and Wellbeing team here in the House of Commons who helped me so much to have the confidence and the courage to go back to Shrewsbury to announce to my local association that I was now in a same-sex partnership. And I have to say to you that although they coaxed me into it, when I was on the train going from Shrewsbury to London, I prayed on, I think, 3 separate occasions that the train would break down. I still couldn't quite face it. I hoped that there would be some sort of godly intervention, that something would happen, that the tree would fall on the track or the train would be delayed or something. I would miss my connection and I wouldn't have to deal with it. But the train, of course, arrived on time, unusually, I have to say, at Shrewsbury train station, and I went to see my local association. So I said to them, I gave them my monthly report, the 50 most senior members of Shrewsbury Conservative Association in a room in front of me, and I went through my monthly report about what's happening here in the House of Commons, politics, some of the achievements that we've secured in terms of investment for Shrewsbury over the last quarter. And then I said to them, I looked at them, and I looked at the 50 faces in front of me. And they are marvellous men and women, as I'm sure everybody will agree. Party members from all political parties, Conservatives and Labour. They are the hard workers who go out there in the rain, delivering leaflets, taking abuse on the doorsteps, organising campaigns, and they do it for free. We get paid. But these are men and women who I would always say are the salt of the earth, who believe in their nation, who believe in whatever politics they are affiliated to, whether it's the Labour Party or the Conservative Party, and they are, as you will know, Sir Roger, a Member of Parliament really relies upon those people in the Executive Council and the senior members of the association. We could not do the job that we do if it wasn't for these people. And when I announced to them that I was now in a same-sex partnership, I looked at the 50 faces. And a gentleman in the front row, a traditional Conservative Party member with the striped jacket, a sort of brigadier general type figure, immediately stood up, straight like a military man, stood up and said, "Well, I think that's marvellous. I think that's marvellous. Well done." And started to clap. And then, as if a sea of people in front of me stood up, all of them stood up and started to clap. And coming up to me, giving me hugs. We were in the bar area and they were wanting to buy me whiskey. I went away, rather with a double whiskey, I went away with a tumbler of whiskey because all the men were trying to buy me double scotches. And it was something which will stay with me forever, Sir Roger. It is those moments in life when you throw yourself in a way which you don't know what's going to happen and you don't know how people are going to react. It's those moments in your life that you really see raw humanity in operation. And the love, the kindness, the sincerity that my Shrewsbury Conservative Association treated me is something that will stay with me forever, but it will also empower me for the rest of my life. And I want to end on this point by referencing a lovely gentleman called Ray Mitchell, the late Ray Mitchell, who has now passed away. Ray Mitchell was the gentleman from Shrewsbury Conservatives who ran election campaigns as if it was the Battle of Tobruk, with hardcore military precision. He knew where every single road is. He had people who, with the correct number of bundled leaflets for every person in every street, and he ran a military operation to get my campaign literature across the whole of the constituency every time a general election was called. And he came up to me at the end of my speech, when everybody was hugging and cheering, and he said, "I'd like a word with you alone outside, please." And I thought, oh no, here we go. There's somebody who's really upset with what I said, and now I'm going to get it with both barrels. He said, "I'd just come outside for a minute. There's one private word with you." And he said, "I hear," and you will know, Sir Roger, that an association is cut up into different wards, and they all represent different wards. He said, "I hear that you've given one of the other wards a bottle of House of Commons Scotch by the Prime Minister. Can we have one?" He said, "I couldn't give a monkey's about your sexuality. I'm upset that you've given them a bottle of House of Commons Scotch, but you haven't got one for us. Would you mind terribly getting us one?" And I just wanted to share that story with you because it meant so much to me at the time. I've also been, Sir Roger, I think it was last year, to number 10 Downing Street, where there was an LGBT film being premiered in number 10 Downing Street, marking, I think it was the 50th anniversary of the rescinding of jail sentences against LGBT people. And of course, in the audience there in number 10 Downing Street were many senior citizens who had faced prison sentences in the 50s and whose friends had been incarcerated, and they themselves had to, the whole of their lives, live in fear and worry about being exposed for being gay and ultimately being sent to prison. So that was a very important event in my life as well, seeing those people at the LGBT film. So, Roger, I'd like to pay tribute to Mr. Geoffrey Hardy, who has campaigned for LGBT issues in Shrewsbury for many, many decades. And in 2005, thanks to the Labour administration, he was able to undertake a civil partnership. He and his partner, Peter, they had been together for 25 years. They were the first couple in Shropshire to have a civil partnership. And he writes to me to say that Radio Shropshire broadcast the cheer from the registry office, and the Shropshire Star put it on the front page. The reaction we had when driving through Shrewsbury, pink ribbons on the front of a vintage Bentley was overwhelmingly positive. An emotional time for us. Civil partnerships were a huge step change in acceptance of our lives and relationships. And I want to pay tribute to the Labour government for introducing civil partnerships and reiterate the sentence that he says. Civil partnerships were a huge step change in acceptance of our lives and our relationships. Of course, the subsequent Conservative government introduced equal marriage as well, and I will come on to that later. Mr. Hardy has been at the forefront of creating Shropshire Rainbow Film Festival from 2006. And this Rainbow Film Festival has gone from strength to strength. In 2011, we advertised, and this is important, we advertised with, and he's written this in bold, we advertised with banners across the streets, a huge step forward. Year upon year, the festival has become very successful, and more heterosexual people have attended, realizing that our lives and experiences are not separate. But he's put banners across the streets in bold and underlined. This is all about being proud that you're gay, being proud that you are having a film festival promoting LGBT rights and LGBT experiences. And this isn't in metropolitan London. This is in quiet, sleepy Shrewsbury. And the huge enthusiasm for LGBT rights in Shrewsbury is something that comes to the fore from everything that Mr. Hardy has been telling me over the years. He is a staunch socialist and a strong Jeremy Corbyn supporter. So you can imagine how he and I have very little in common when it comes to politics. But we are kindred spirits when it comes to promoting LGBT rights and sharing our experiences. He then goes on to talk about the campaign for equal marriage. And the Roman Catholic bishop was often on the front page of the Shropshire Star in opposition. He says, we distributed flyers, wristbands, and encouraged people to write to their local members of Parliament. And that is a very important issue I wanted to highlight again, Sir Roger. I remember the debate that we had on equal marriage. This was a very difficult issue for me. I had not at that stage come out, and there were many constituents who were writing to me, very angry, very furious, that we could even be contemplating equal marriage. Civil same-sex partnerships was one thing. Civil partnerships was another. But you will, honourable members will remember the anger and antagonism and frustration that there was for equal marriage. This is a step too far. Marriage is only between men and women. And this we should not be pursuing. And of course it was difficult for me at that time, but I voted for equal marriage, and I'm very proud to have done so. And I'm even more proud that it was a Conservative government that put it on the statute book. And again, Sir Roger, there was one couple, very religious couple from the village of Condover, who came to see me. I won't mention their names, but they spent the day with me on the day that we were passing the Equal Marriages Act. And they came and had lunch with me in the House of Commons, the couple with their 2 children, their son, who had been to Shrewsbury School and was now a doctor in Manchester. And the mother turned around to me and said something which will stay with me forever. She said, you have to vote for equal marriage. And she was a very strong Protestant. You have to vote for equal marriage because I don't want my son living in sin. And just remember that for a moment from a devout Protestant lady. You must vote for equal marriage because I don't want my son living in sin. That will stay with me forever. And lastly, from Mr. Hardy, Shrewsbury Carnival Pride. And LGBT Shrewsbury have joined with the Shrewsbury Town Carnival. We have a wonderful town carnival that goes through the whole of Shrewsbury and the quarry every year, and we have massive floats. We're not quite Rio de Janeiro in Shrewsbury, but we do our best. and we have all these floats going through the town, and we've now had, for many years, an LGBT float which passes through the town. And I stood there one year with my partner, partner of 8 years, and we just stood there watching. And to see the applause and the cheering from all young people in Shrewsbury for the LGBT float was something very powerful for me, and I'm very, very grateful for that. And of course, the LGBT float has received many prizes over the years. So, Roger, getting back to specifically the schools element on this, I wanted to read out to you something that Stonewall has sent to me. And it's a quote from Joshua, 19, from Scotland. He says, "I think there needs to be a fundamental rethink about how we teach young people about sex, love, and relationships. LGBT issues need to be an important part of our curriculum in order for us to truly feel we are part of an equal society." And a growing number, another quote which struck me in a lot of evidence that Stonewall have sent me is this, and I'd like honourable members to really listen to this quote and remember it. "A growing number of faith schools, not ordinary schools, but a growing number of faith schools are delivering LGBT inclusive training. They are doing this not in spite of their faith ethos, but because of it. By recognizing the values of love, tolerance, and acceptance that lie at the heart of their faith." And this is such an important quote, because religion has been used so many times, as the Minister will know, in trying to, as I've said from my own experiences of Roman Catholicism, but it also applies to certain Muslim groups and others, that this intolerance towards homosexuality actually goes, I would argue, squarely against the teachings of these religions, especially my religion of Catholicism, which does seek to promote love, tolerance, and acceptance. And that is very, very important to remember. The House of Commons, ahead of this debate, decided to post on Facebook to ask people's views and experiences of teaching on LGBT community and acceptance in schools. And there are two quotes which I think are relevant, which I wanted to share. One of them, Sir Roger, is from Lacuna magazine. Somebody at Lacuna magazine, which is a magazine that promotes human rights. And this person writes, "When I think of how the knot in my teenage heart could have been loosened if I had even one lesson at school telling me I wasn't broken or put together wrong, I realize that this isn't a religious or even spiritual debate, it's a matter of human rights." And that's from Lacuna magazine. And also from the National Secular Society, "We agree wholeheartedly with Mr. Kawczynski that it is important to make sure all children from an early age are taught that there is nothing wrong with being gay. We also agree that doing so would help to improve mental health and reduce bullying and abuse. We fully support efforts to make education in the United Kingdom inclusive for all. We urge the government to ensure every child, regardless of their religious background, leaves school in the knowledge that LGBT+ people are equal and that it's perfectly okay to be gay." I'm going to wrap up shortly, Sir Roger, but I wanted to ask the Minister about the LGBT Action Plan, which the government has put into place. And of course, this has not received sufficient attention because of the merry-go-round that is Brexit and the focus on that issue. But I would like to ask the Minister about one thing which particularly appalls me, which is conversion therapy. I think of conversion therapy as some sort of Frankenstein's monster of abuse, not only physical abuse, but also mental torture. I couldn't imagine possibly anybody wanting to send their child to have some sort of conversion therapy. I think, as I've said to you, Sir Roger, it's impossible to recalibrate the mind. It's impossible to trick the mind. It's impossible to turn somebody from being gay into straight. And I think the mental angst and the mental torture that children would go through on a conversion therapy is something which deeply troubles me. I would like to call the Minister to explain to us when this practice is going to be outlawed in the United Kingdom, and for him to give me an update on that issue. Sir Roger, I, on the one hand, respect the rights of these parents outside these schools in Birmingham to demonstrate. Nobody wants our children to have overtly sexual things in schools at an inappropriately young age. This is a very delicate matter, and it has to be treated with a huge amount of sensitivity. But I appeal to those protesters. What sort of a message does it send out to young LGBT people when we see the anger and the rage and the vitriol emanating from them about LGBT issues? By all means, if they have concerns about LGBT acceptance and education in schools, they ought to be coming to see the Minister, they ought to be lobbying government, they ought to be questioning and probing all the time about how this is going to be implemented, what the sensitivities are. But I appeal to them, show some tolerance and some civility to how vulnerable young people are at that stage, and don't do anything which puts young people thinking that they are not worth and they are somehow unequal. I went through that as a young person. I don't want young people to go through that again. And just before I take an intervention from the Right Honourable Lady, who is somebody I respect enormously from the Labour bench, that's probably done her career no good whatsoever, but she is. I'd like to say that, no, I'll take the intervention first.
I find it difficult to know when to intervene in the honourable member's speech because it has been so powerful, so heartfelt. I have no words except to say how much I applaud absolutely everything he said, and for him to know that I think that his words here today will mean the knot in many teenage hearts will have been loosened. So I feel so proud that he is a member of our House and that he has used his own personal experience as well as his analysis to make the speech he has. And I think this has been very important, and I thank him for doing that.
Well, I'd like to thank the Right Honourable Lady, and I'd like to pay tribute to her. She has been a stalwart of campaigning for equality on LGBT issues, not just today, when it's easier so to do, but she was at the forefront of campaigning on LGBT issues back in the 80s, 70s and 80s and 90s when it wasn't as easy to do that. She herself is not part of the LGBT community, and so her empathy with this issue just shows how pioneering and visionary she is, and the integrity and honour that she has always displayed as a member of this House of Commons. Sir Roger, I will end by saying this. There was recently going to be a footballer, a famous footballer, who plays, I'm not really a football fan, I'm afraid, so I don't follow football, but a very famous footballer was apparently going to come out, and he decided not to do so. And this was all over the radio recently, that he was going to announce that he was out and start raising issues of LGBT, and then he decided to back off. I would say to him publicly on television, and to anybody who is in a position of responsibility or who has a public profile, whether you are a footballer whether you play for England's rugby team, whether you are a television presenter, or whether you are a member of parliament. If you are gay, and if you have come out, it is extremely important to do what I'm doing today, which is to carry on talking and giving assurance to young people that actually, if you go through this process, 99 people out of 100 will show you love, tolerance, and understanding. I took my beloved mother on holiday to our favourite Polish seaside resort this summer with my partner, Fernando. And I'd also like to inform members that after 8 years of being together, we're going to have a civil partnership in the House of Commons on November the 9th. That's if we don't have a... and I tell you this, even if we have an election, it's a Saturday, and I'm going to abandon campaigning to come back to have my civil partnership, because I'm not going to leave my hubby at the altar just because of the general election. I can tell you that for nothing. But we have a duty and a responsibility, Sir Roger, to do this, to give them the confidence, to show them the extraordinary positive experiences that we have had from our fellow men and women in society about how loving and tolerant they are to us. But I took my mother on holiday, and she gave me one example of prejudice. My mother always comes to Shrewsbury every election time. She lives in Gloucestershire, but she comes. Nobody works harder than my mum when it comes to handing out leaflets on doorsteps and canvassing. And she told me of a story. I was talking to her about this debate that I was going to have, and she told me of a story where two men in, I won't mention where it was in Shrewsbury, but two men looked at her in horror when she told them that she was campaigning for Daniel Kawczynski and she was his mum. And they looked at her with disgust and said to her, "Of course we're not going to vote for this deviant." And it's a shame, isn't it? But you can never reason with prejudice. And there are always going to be prejudiced people in our society. And she was upset, of course, that they would say that to her. I would hope that they would assess me and any other gay member of Parliament about our politics and what party we stand for, rather than who we love and who we want to be with. And I remember 1979 watching Margaret Thatcher when she was asked on television, "How could you be a Prime Minister when you're a woman?" And in 1979, there were many people who were really fearful and questioning about the ability of a woman to become Prime Minister. And I'll never forget what Margaret Thatcher said on television. She said, "Well, I say to these people, it's as well you didn't live in the period of Elizabeth I, isn't it? And what would have happened to our great nation if it wasn't for great women like Elizabeth I and what they did for our country?" So Margaret Thatcher fought against prejudice when it came to women standing in politics and achieving the highest role in office. And today, in our own different way, we are standing against prejudice, which still exists in our country. This is I've been to over 90 countries in the world on business and politics, and I would argue that this is one of, if not the, most tolerant and welcoming of societies that I've ever come across in any country in the world. Sometimes I think because we're British, we tend to hide our light under a bushel. I think we ought to be extraordinarily proud, despite our huge political differences over Brexit and other issues. We ought to be proud what a beacon of tolerance this country is compared to other countries around the world, 16 of which I still believe have the death penalty if you happen to love somebody who's of the same sex as you. And we need to always, Sir Roger, promote and celebrate that tolerance, not only in our own country, but as a beacon for other countries around the world that are still on the path towards where we are today. Thank you, Sir Roger.